Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. While some people are barely making ends meet, others are complaining about the resorts and expensive cars. Stephen, the only son of the owner of a chain of hotels and a fleet of pleasure boats, managed to join it all by the age of 13. Egypt. Sorrow. Grimacing when a classmate bragged about an upcoming trip. This Egypt sucks. Nothing interesting about those pyramids. The fifth one was okay. Stephen told me about his trip to Thailand. And Phuket is a green bore. The classmates whispered about it. And John, a famous wit, ironically said our Stephen to listen to. So grow up in a wealthy family, what a challenge. But there is some truth in it, shrugged Lisa. Stephen has long ago lost the joy of even the same trip to Egypt or Thailand. He is no longer surprised by anything. Boredom, interrogation, security, that's all emotions. Yes, John nodded. The Wallace family was one of the richest in town. Their family name was not only in the ears of the rich, but also of the average citizen. There was nothing strange about that. After all, a well-known businessman in the city offered hotel rooms and pleasure boats of different price categories. That means that his services could be used not only by the wealthy, but also by the poor people. Both those and others were treated to the highest standards, and there were no dissatisfied people. Therefore, many people repeatedly returned to the hotels and took boat trips. John Wallace inherited the hotel business from his father. At that time, it was only a couple of hotels. In 10 years, the business has grown to a whole network of luxury hotels with different degrees of stardom. But Mr. Wallace did not think to stop there. He reasonably assumed that guests of the city would be interested in exploring local attractions. But a mere sightseeing tour seemed like yesterday to him. What about a boat ride? It was said and done. To begin with, 3 boats were purchased. The calculation was right. Boat rides were in high demand, which meant that new boats had to be purchased. Now there is a park of 27 boats at the service of residents and guests of the city. The future was predetermined for many years ahead. He graduates from the institute and enters the business. And later, of course, he would inherit the family business. Did Stephen want to go into business? It's hard to say. The guy didn't like boredom. His soul constantly demanded a holiday. And business is, above all, routine. But being not a stupid guy, Stephen already learned in elementary school that it is thanks to business he will be able to maintain his life at the level to which he is accustomed. But then, the hotel business means interaction with foreign partners, trips around the world to exchange experiences and other interesting events, including international ones. All this gives an opportunity to minimize the routine. Growing up in a fabulously wealthy family was fun, easy, and enjoyable. The Wallaces traveled extensively. They had real estate not only within the country, but also abroad. And not ordinary, but elite. When there was a family feast to be had, not an entree of chefs from the best restaurants, maids, designers, musicians, and sometimes Amadou. At every Stephen birthday party, there were animators and, on occasion, entertainers. All the boy's wishes were guessed and fulfilled at the snap of his fingers. What can we say? The childhood of Stephen Wallace was cloudless, except that in this cloudless childhood was just unbearably lonely. The father, although he did not neglect communication with his son, was not much at home. Kathy, Stephen's mother, went around the salons, stores, and social events, leaving him in the care of a nanny. Besides, it was not safe to be the child of wealthy parents. When Stephen was put in kindergarten, Mr. Wallace hired a security guard for him. God forbid they steal him for ransom. Stephen could not help but realize that he was a tidbit for those who would make a fortune out of other people's misfortune. So he tolerated the presence of the guards without complaint. Though, God knows, he was terribly embarrassed in front of his peers. To go outside and splash around in a puddle. But no, that was a pleasure Stephen couldn't afford. Just in case some homegrown paparazzi takes a picture of John Wallace's only hair splashing in a puddle, That would be embarrassing. So in everything we touch, he's Wallace's son. And that says it all. Stephen has entered the 11th grade, and one of the family's most pressing issues is his education. In this regard, the Wallaces, unlike most rich people, gave the boy complete freedom of choice. "I'm not going to pressure you in any way," John said. "The choice is yours. Wherever you want to go, that's where you go. In fact, my plans for education do not conflict with your wishes," said Stephen, smiling. "I want to enroll in hospitality management. I've already looked into it. Is that really what you want? Well, why not? Shrug our family business. It's pretty interesting. So why not explore it in detail? You know what I mean," Dad said approvingly. "Yeah, you're right. It's very interesting, and I'm proud of you." "Yes, there's nothing to be proud of yet," replied Stephen modestly. "You don't say," John replied cheerfully. "The fact that you're showing zeal is something to be proud of. I'm sure you will succeed." "Thank you for your confidence," smiled the son. "There's one thing I'm not sure about." "What's that?" "I'm not good at math." Stephen waved his hands. "And at the university I'm interested in, they study it." "Is that a problem nowadays?" exclaimed Wallace Sr. "Let's hire a tutor. It's a piece of cake." After studying several candidates on the website of the agency providing services in St. Petersburg, Wallace decided to stop at Adriana. Reviews about the 32-year-old tutor were already impressive. Yes, and a red diploma from the math department of the local state university was a weighty plus. At the interview, the young woman showed herself a real professional. Besides, the society of a young and beautiful woman is much more pleasant than that of a dull person of uncertain age wearing old women's glasses. Anyway, Adriana's candidacy was approved. When Adriana graduated from high school, the question of further education was not even a question. In fact, it was solved even when Adriana was in elementary school. Of course, the Pedagogical Institute. The girl answered her mother's question, where she planned to enter. Sofia Semyonovna nodded. What is true is true. As a child, Adriana was very fond of playing school. Besides, she was an excellent public speaker and could find an approach even to the most difficult person. So Adriana had a vocation for pedagogy. And if it is a favored business, then God himself commanded to sow the reasonable, good, and eternal. After graduating from the institute with a red diploma, the girl found a job in one of the municipal schools of the city. Not the limit of dreams, but to start a career is not so bad. But unfortunately, having worked at the school for a year, she fell under the reduction in force. Adriana was worried, and then decided to get a second education. Thanks to the university's admission commissions had already started to work. As a result, Adriana became a student of the math department. When she had an internship at the school, the principal almost immediately paid attention to her, and it was no coincidence that the elderly mathematician could not retire for one simple reason: there was no replacement. Adriana seemed to the principal the worthwhile candidate. In addition to her main job, she was engaged in tutoring. The salary of a young specialist left much to be desired, and tutoring services. Besides, with 2 higher education degrees, the pleasure was not cheap. Adriana had heard a lot about the entrepreneur Wallace. The young teacher could not know what kind of character he had, but it seemed to her that Wallace was an extraordinary man. When he wrote Adriana on the website and offered to work with him, the girl could not believe that it was true. Such cooperation unequivocally promised good money, and who knows recommendations among people of the same circle. Yes, there would be a whole line of people lining up for her. You wish. She pulled herself. He hasn't hired you yet, and you're already making plans. Wallace, exclaimed Betty's friend and coworker. You're growing up, my friend. But I won't say go before I jump, smiled Adriana. But being invited to an interview is already half the success. But I bet you would. A friend said, listen, maybe you should have a Stephen with him. But hello, here we are. I'm going to work for him, not have an affair. But one doesn't preclude the other. A sly wink from my friend. And they, the rich, such entertainment is very much welcomed. How do you know? Adriana snorted. Betty, being the spouse of Nice, the head of the mine site, did not need additional earnings. So her advice puzzled Adriana a little. Not that I know of. Her friend spoke slowly. But my cousin works as an administrator in a sauna, and she gets rich men in her files almost every day. Well, you compare it. Adriana replied with a grin. They just have such an association. If a woman works in a sauna, she must be ready for anything. And you cannot change my mind that I, say, just earn money. And I'm a teacher. I'm supposed to be serious. Oh, but what can I do? Or else I waved my hands and, having loaded, added, and I'm not in the mood for romance right now. It's fine by me. You're funny. Nice. Adriana sighed. She'd broken up with Robert not so long ago. That love had gotten Adriana in a lot of trouble, but the young woman had only recently decided to end the relationship. They met at a time when Adriana was getting a second degree. She was in her third year, and Robert was finishing graduate school. After graduating from graduate school, he stayed on to teach at the university. It was then that Robert suggested to Adriana that they should move in together. The young people had been cohabiting for 5 years. It could not be said that the fact of cohabitation so strained Adriana. However, deep down she really wanted Robert to propose a legal marriage. And what loving woman wouldn't want that? Adriana talked about having a child, but her lover said it was too soon. Robert, but I'm already 28. She noticed after a year of living together. Some women my age have more than one child. So what? And if all the girls your age run off to drown themselves, will you follow them? I couldn't think of anything smarter. Adriana burst into flames. What did I say wrong? Because I'm not chasing anyone, she explained. That's what I'm getting at. Very early. Actually, at my age it's not very early, but just right. In the West, they have their firstborn after 30, Robert said. What did you say about drowning yourself? Adriana grinned at her roommate. But what's the use? It's a vicious circle. She still repeatedly talked about the child, but there is still there. And before she knew it, Adriana was celebrating her 32nd birthday. Lovely. You shouldn't eat him, Betty said. He just doesn't want a baby. That's the whole story. You're not gonna get a ring or a stamp in your passport. Meanwhile, the biological clock is ticking. So, honey, get out of here. There's nothing there for you. And if you want a baby so badly, find another man with your looks, it's no problem. So tell me, what is it? Adriana waved her hand. You don't know your own worth. Adriana was an attractive girl of short height and figure with a lush mane of dark brown almond hair, prominent eyes, the color of strong tea, and expressive lips. Unless a lazy man said to her, with that kind of looks you can find yourself the kind of fiancé you want. And you're stuck with that rainmaker. Adriana smiled guiltily. I love him. What can I do? But the moment came when things reached a critical point. One day, Robert caught her packing. Where are you going? He asked in surprise. A business trip. No, Robert, she replied in a vindictive tone. I'm leaving. What do you mean? Stunned lover. Just like that. Adriana waved her hands. Interesting, said Robert. And what was it that didn't suit us? It would be very interesting to hear, she grinned seriously. It's sort of been said more than once. Not enough money, Robert. What money? Have I ever told you about money? I kind of make money too. But if you really don't remember that, then what's the point of this conversation? And it hit me, Robert. I get that you get it. Do you have someone? Of course I do. How could I not have guessed? He exclaimed. Adriana shrugged her shoulders and let him think what he wanted. In a way, it was flattering. A couple of weeks later, the teacher received an invitation from Mr. Wallace. 3 days after the interview, Adriana began her tutoring duties. To be honest, she was a little afraid of the first meeting with her mentee. It was no secret to the young woman that children of rich parents often behave arrogantly. She herself, however, had not yet encountered them. But more than once she had heard about such an attitude from tutors from the agency. For such outlets, a tutor is something like a servant. That's what something is, not someone. But what is it? Adriana once heard a story about how the 15-year-old son of a rich businessman, I think the owner of a meat packing plant, offered a young tutor money for sexual favors. Do not agreed. And the teenager's mother, having learned about what happened, wrote a statement on the teacher. Since the boy was only 15, the tutor faced a very real term under Article 134. However, in the end, the young teacher got off with compulsory labor and a signature not to leave. But she had to say goodbye to her pedagogical practice for 5 years. From this story, Adriana concluded that it is not worth it to give in to provocations, although such nonsense in her head is simply unthinkable. Intimacy with a student. Ew, that's disgusting. Before the first session of S. Wallace Jr., Adriana studied his social networking profiles. The pages were not closed, which characterized Stephen Wallace as a man of open mind. The heir to 1 billion, if not 1 trillion, turned out to be a tall and lean young man with shoulder-length dark curly hair that he gathered into a ponytail. The only offspring of a hotel and boat owner, definitely loved flashy parties and foreign trips. But what was strange was that he didn't have a single picture of him with a girl. Maybe he's gay, Adriana thought. But why should I care? Judging by the pictures on the wall, the boy was a fan of soccer and expensive cars. All the walls of Stephen's room were covered with pictures of famous soccer players, mostly David Beckham and Cristiano Ronaldo, and cars of mostly outlandish models. Adriana looked around the room with interest, and the guy, judging by his facial expression, liked it very much. "Hello," his tutor greeted him politely. "My name is Adriana." "Hello, I'm Stephen." With a smile, the boy answered her and suddenly asked her, "Are you interested in cars too?" "Well, not really interested," answered Adriana, "but very interesting models." "Do you really like it?" Stephen perked up. The guy clearly lacks socialization. It flashed through the tutor's mind. "Do you like it?" She smiled and nodded, not without surprise, noting that her mentee didn't seem to have an ounce of arrogance in him. "But now, we'll get down to the business I'm here for. First, let's check your level of knowledge. It's disappointingly low." "Disarm him," Stephen smiled. "Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here now." "That's understandable," Adriana nodded. "But still, I suggest you do a little test. We'll determine your level of knowledge, and then we'll decide where to go from here." Okay. The results of the test were truly dismal. The 11th grader was at the level of a 6th grader. "Yes, I'll have to work as hard as Pythagoras." Wallace Jr. smiled guiltily. "And even to a classmate," thought Adriana, and said aloud, "Well, do not worry, not God's burn pots. I promise to do my best and hope to be as helpful as possible. Let's get started." The class was at 200 hours and was paid by the hour. When Wallace Sr. transferred an amount to Adriana's card, she was surprised. "But that's a lot." It's fine. I've been watching you from my office and I can tell you're a real professional, but not a professional. But don't ever say that again." Her employer cut her off. "Even if you don't feel like a professional, you don't have to show the look. A person goes to a professional and expects appropriate fulfillment of the task at hand." Yeah. That's just for future reference. Personally, you didn't disappoint me. Thank you." Adriana was born. "What are you thankful for?" The entrepreneur shrugged. "Thank you for your good work." After seeing the tutor off, Stephen thought deeply. She was good. What can I say? For the son of an entrepreneur, beautiful girls were certainly not a novelty. But Adriana, unlike the glamorous dolls in his circle, had a natural beauty. She had a very beautiful face, luxurious dark brown hair, and the figure was just a looker. From the resume tutor, Stephen learned that Adriana Andreevna was 32 years old, but she looked no more than 23. The guy was willing to bet that if her strict suit was replaced by a brightly colored dressy or t-shirt and jeans, the tutor would look even younger. The guy suddenly imagined him and Adriana strolling through the park, and then what would happen next? The rich man's hair didn't think. He didn't have any racy thoughts in his head. There were some thoughts, though. And what boy his age wouldn't have them? Besides, Stephen was ruthless in chasing them away. Was Stephen Wallace a success with the ladies? There was no clear answer to that question. On the one hand, the girls found him quite an attractive guy. The fact that Stephen wasn't stupid was also a plus. But when he started ranting about how bored he was in Thailand, Egypt, or anywhere else, and the Volkswagen is for beggars Ford, they wanted to crack Stephen over the head. The girls, as well as the guys, thought he was drawing. And Wallace Jr. knew it. But it didn't occur to them that Stephen wasn't even thinking about getting in. The guy was really bored with everything, in connection with which he associated himself neither more nor less with Eugene Onegin. Once he told his father about it, and the latter only laughed with modesty. This is clearly not going to die. Eugene Onegin it is. Jokes are jokes, but Stephen, nevertheless, very much wanted variety in life. But where to find it? The young man did not even suspect that very soon diversity will not make him wait long. And how did he feel about it? Waiting for an answer, Betty glared at Adriana. But she shrugged her shoulders after a moment's silence. He's just a normal teenager, like a lot of teenagers, but from a very rich family. And you know what surprised me? He doesn't have the snobbery of the rich kids. What's your student got to do with it, you fool? Betty laughed. I mean his father. What about his father? I got nothing to surprise you with. A regular rich businessman, by the way, who paid more than the agreed-upon amount. So maybe it's a trick, a wink and a friend. God be with you. Adriana waved her hand. He almost gave me a lecture about positioning yourself as a professional, even if you are not sure of your professional skills. But then you should have seen his wife. When I walked out on them, Wallace's wife drove in a luxury foreign car, sparkling with new diamonds. Not like you and me, anyway. So what? Betty said ironically. We know these FIFA with their diamonds. Both husbands and wives have someone. You know all that about everyone. Adriana grinned. You bet I do, Adriana. But do you really have nothing to say about him? I've only seen him. Not much. He sent me a transfer when I left and told me how to present myself. That's about it. I see. Mrs. Betty, realizing that she couldn't get anything more out of her nosy friend. And you certainly didn't ask Mr. Wallace any questions. Adriana wondered what questions should I have asked. Well, about business, for one. Betty, for a moment. I came to see him as a tutor for his son. She replied with a chuckle. Why the hell would I want to know about his business? Just for general knowledge. What would he appreciate? Why should he? For me, the main thing is for the employer to appreciate my professional skills, not interest in his person. Oh, come on. Betty waved her hand in annoyance. You don't know how to network, do you? I wasn't going to. Adriana parried. He's the employer, and I'm the door. That's it. I don't like to make eye contact. Betty rolled her eyes, letting her friend know she didn't share her point of view. But she didn't care. Stephen Wallace suddenly appeared before Adriana's eyes. The guy has really smart eyes, by the way. What's that about? She asked herself, but she couldn't find an answer. A week passed, and Adriana was pleased to note that her mentee was making good progress. John doubled her salary and promised to recommend Adriana to his wealthy acquaintances. How cool you are, Mishka, Betty said respectfully. Stephen's 16th birthday was 2 weeks away, and his father asked if he had any ideas for a birthday party. I think we've run out of ideas, he shrugged. No way, John shook his head, looking intently at his son. You know what's valuable in a good businessman? Creativity. Yeah, creativity. The ability to develop new ideas and, accordingly, to realize them. That's just as valuable as entrepreneurship. By the way, keep that in mind for the future. I will, nodded Stephen. But I still don't have any ideas. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. The guy waved his hands. I see. But then it's time to remember that two heads are better than one, said John. Together, father and son developed a script for Stephen's 16th birthday. Dad, said the lad hesitantly. What is encouraging? Smiled the father. Any other ideas? Not really an idea, Stephen hesitated. But I want to invite Adriana, he replied, embarrassed. Not if you don't mind. Why is that, I wonder? Should I mind? Surprised Wallace Sr., it's your birthday. And if she accepts your invitation, why shouldn't she? Why wouldn't she accept it? For example, she may have some business of her own planned, shrugged John. Or she has a man who won't let go. It's not that big of a deal. Dad, what's the point in guessing? Stephen said reasonably. Our business is to offer. Stephen, you're growing up. Adriana complimented him. Thank you for your kind words. But I think it's to your credit. The student replied with a smile. Adriana, I want to invite you to my birthday party. My birthday. She was surprised. Well, yes, nodded Stephen. No, if you have your own plans or a jealous husband, I understand and will not be offended. I do not have any husband, with a sigh answered Adriana, and immediately scolded at himself. What does he need my private life for? Come on, distrustfully exclaimed the ward, and immediately bought his tongue. That is, I wanted to say everything is normal, assured the tutor, and quite unexpectedly added, I will definitely come. In the evening, taking a bath with her favorite scent of lilac, Adriana indulged in reflection. The young woman did not fully understand what had made her accept her student's invitation. No matter how respectfully the Wallace treated Adriana, she realized that the tutor was just another member of their staff, and she was part of the entourage. But then why on earth would she be invited to a birthday party? And suddenly, Adriana realized this kid, despite his father's 1 million, was hard to call happy. And he was probably very lonely. That was why Stephen had invited Adriana, and she in turn had accepted his invitation for the same reason. To be fair, Adriana did break through a few times, to call and say she couldn't make it. The young woman's hand reached for her cell phone several times, but she never dared to say no. When Adriana told about Stephen's invitation to her friend, the latter splashed her hands. Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. And don't tell me you said no. You realize I didn't. Adriana said mockingly, and you should have. Betty said emphatically. Remember, friend, good for you. Listen, do you know what you're going to wear yet? Adriana said slowly. She had just realized that she hadn't thought about what she was going to wear. What would you do without Aunt Betty? After all, you're going to a party in a rich house, which means you have to dress appropriately. You know, silk, satin, diamonds. Where would I get diamonds? Adriana grinned. But that's just figurative. My point is that you need to be on the level, not to make a mess. You think I don't understand that. Why didn't you think about the outfit? Adriana shrugged her shoulders. I've been so wrapped up. There are still 4 days until my birthday. So I would have thought about an outfit sooner or later. I'd think about an outfit before I blew Betty away. You don't have to think about it. You have to think it through. Oh, you'd say it's a lot of thought. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but no one's gonna pay any attention to me. I'm sure the invited women will be wearing dresses that cost 3 times my salary. But let me disagree, because it's not the dress, it's the woman. But these rich sons will wear their Versus creations. It's not the woman they'll remember, it's the dress. What's the use of a brand name if it fits like a saddle on a cow? Well, as for you, so on you, and a sack of potatoes will look like an exquisite outfit. Well, you just gave a whole lecture. Adriana exclaimed, remembering Wallace Sr., but frankly, I didn't understand what you were trying to say. Never mind. Betty replied cheerfully. Anya, shall we go where? What do you mean? Where? She snorted. To shopping, of course. Where else? Time permitting. I don't feel like it. Adriana shook her head. Oh no. Betty was determined, and when she was determined, her opponent didn't stand a chance. So Adriana let herself be persuaded and ended up with a breathtakingly beautiful silver-colored dress with an open back, a neckline, a window at the chest, and a slit almost to the hip. Just right, Mila said approvingly as she came out of the fitting room. Seductive, but not a hint of vulgarity. Adriana looked at herself critically in the mirror. The dress, of course, sat as flush as if it had been waiting for her, but she thought the outfit was a little too daring. This wasn't a social gathering or New Year's Eve. Adriana, I assure you, all the men's eyes will be on you, assured her knowledgeable friend. And so it was when Adriana entered the banquet hall. The men looked at her with marked interest, and half of the women were overcome with inferiority complexes. Who's that? Christina asked. A socialite and a friend of the celebrant's mother. Is it Stephen's tutor? Answered Kathy, not without envy, thinking what a gorgeous figure she had. And this she hid under loose shrines and closed dresses. Kathy wondered. Silly woman. Wallace's wife was in great shape, thanks to gym yoga, special massages. But this girl's figure was top-notch. Tutor Stephen, and girlfriend. And you're not afraid of what? Of what? Christina's eyes rounded. Yes, you look at her, this lady only in erotic movies to star in and are not afraid that she seduces your son. What is this nonsense? No, it's not nonsense. The woman objected. You remember Oksana Zolotic, don't you? That's the one who after the divorce in Spain left. And she is the same. Nodded Christina. So she and her ex hired an English tutor for her son. And one day Oksana accidentally stumbled upon a racy correspondence in social networking, which their Sam led with the tutor. And guess what? Purely by accident, grinned Kathy. How's that? It seems that the guy did not close the page on Marcelo, the socialite's forehead. I don't remember the details. You don't look at them as educators. Ladies don't get lost. In the end, it turned out that Sam has been sleeping with his tutor for 2 months. Nightmare, Mrs. Wallace shook her head. A nightmare, nodded Christina. And what did the parents do? Mrs. Wallace asked. What about the parents? Parents reported it to the school and law enforcement. Serves them right. And what was it that soothed your heart? The tutor didn't deny the obvious. And then, the court suspended her for 2 years and banned her from teaching for 3 years. Not enough. I'd shamelessly give her more. How bloodthirsty are you? Kathy laughed, laughingly, but if I were you and John, I'd pay close attention to that lady. I don't know. Kathy shrugged. John says she's a real professional, and I've always trusted his judgment. And if he says so, it must be true. Who can argue with that? Except that professionalism doesn't stop him. Oh, but don't push it. This girl, but did not give away her desire to cut down. She dresses strictly, and Kathy Acer put down half a word. Right in the middle of the hall, Stephen and his teacher danced a medley of tango, waltz, and some other dances. Are you now going to argue that your tutor has no intention of seducing your son? Patronize us that we do, Christina said. Kathy was speechless. What is she doing? She thought angrily. I must say, the duet was just great, and some of the guests began to applaud. And one of Wallace's partners, the famous ladies' man Pavel Zhukov, asked what kind of a beautiful nymph is this? Why? I don't know. John grinned, but he could not know her, for this lady was not of our party. And who is she, this tutor? The kid's got a math problem, and he's applying next year. So I found him this beautiful girl. By the way, Stephen has started to show interest in the Queen of Science. And the main thing is that now it's not so bad, said the Beatles. Beautiful, seductive, and smart. Just a treasure. I'd like to get to know her better. Rick, you are in your repertoire. Wallace wagged his finger. Are you charming today? Stephen said playfully, much to the embarrassment of the tutor. Thank you, of course, but you're exaggerating. Not at all, smiled the student. Are you seeing each other right now? Here we go. The dress is brilliant." Adriana laughed. "I'm not talking about dresses. I'm talking about you." The young woman could smell the scent of expensive perfume and elite alcohol. Stephen was different now. Alcohol changes a man, she thought. It is not without reason that they say that what is on the mind of a sober man is on the tongue of a drunk. When, to Adriana's great relief, the dance was over, Stephen thanked her and turned away. The tutor took her place at the table, and suddenly she noticed that everyone was looking at her with curiosity. Adriana took a convulsive gulp of champagne, and although the piece did not fit in her throat, she took a bite of the salty tablet. "Adriana, can I talk to you for a minute?" She heard a voice behind her. The crumbs of the pill stuck mercilessly in her throat, and the young woman ran out. The voice belonged to Mrs. Wallace, whom Adriana was a little afraid of. Besides, it wasn't hard to guess what the conversation was about. It was all about the dance, of course. "I hear you," Adriana replied nonchalantly, thinking, "After all, I have nothing to fear. It's only a dance. Maybe we should step back," Kathy suggested in a social tone. "All right, if you say so." The women went out into the conservatory and Kathy said, "Adriana, I won't beat around the bush. You are a very attractive girl, but you are first and foremost a teacher. So I would ask you to behave in a manner befitting a teacher." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on." Wallace raised her voice. "You know what you're talking about. There's a lot of stories like that out there these days. I just don't know what you're all counting on. Where do you come from?" Adriana felt a wave of anger wash over her. Why the hell hadn't she done anything wrong? "We'll take it from there. The important thing is not to lose it. Here's the thing. Kathy, I'm sorry, I don't know your middle name. The lady of the house. Just like me," Adriana mentally noted. And she continued with dignity. "Well, Kathy, I know what you mean. I just don't understand what the stories you mentioned have to do with me. A guy asked me to dance. It was in front of guests and parents, not in private. So it was just a dance for him, nothing more." Kathy looked thoughtfully at the young woman and thought, she's right. They were nowhere near privacy or anything else for that matter. But her friend's story made it hard to believe that the tutor was not going to get intimate with Stephen. Kathy had seen with her own eyes the tutor smiling at her son. Flirting it looked like, or was it just a polite smile? Either way, prevention never hurts. "So, Adriana," Wallace said firmly, "was it a dance or something else? But you were not on your best behavior. I hope it won't happen again." Oh, there was so much Adriana wanted to say to this desirable person, like the fact that she didn't give a damn about her son. But since it was none of Adriana's business, she remained silent. So the young woman confined herself to apologizing and promising to behave with more restraint. But there was no need for more restraint. After sitting at the table for about 15 minutes, Adriana was going home so soon. John asked in surprise, "But you haven't even tasted the cake, and we invited you." "I'd love to," said the tutor sincerely, "but I don't feel well." "Well, that's a shame." The next day was Saturday, and Adriana allowed herself to wallow in the warmth of her insoles until 11 o'clock to chase away the remnants of sleep. The young woman stretched sweetly and stood up. Adriana started each morning with a glass of water and lemon. She sat at the table and, sipping the unpretentious drink, indulged in thoughts not in vain and doubted whether or not to go to the birthday party. The young woman thought. In essence, nothing terrible happened. But read the moral. Mrs. Wallace, it's okay, isn't it? Kathy had behaved as any other mother in her position would have behaved. Besides, Wallace was right that there really are a lot of liberated teachers out there. And Adriana didn't know what was on her mind. But why does it feel so dirty? Simply because it's unpleasant. The young woman's thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of a cell phone. Looking at the display, she raised her eyebrows in bewilderment. Robert, the one who was not expected. I wonder what he wants. It seemed that everything had been said to each other. At first, Adriana didn't want to answer, but curiosity got the better of her. "Hello," she answered expressionlessly. "Adriana, how is your precious?" In a cheerful voice, the ex-brother-in-law asked. "With your prayers?" the young woman said in the same fearless voice. "Why so unkind?" "Robert, what did you want?" Adriana decided not to stand on ceremony. "Me, you, and you," she answered impatiently. "But me. Robert, I really don't have time to talk to you." Adriana sighed. "If you have something to say, say it. If not, let's say goodbye." "Have you changed?" Robert noticed. "Was he a good teacher?" She argued. "Are you done?" "Adriana, let's start over." He said. "Did you think long?" The ex-lover asked ironically. "Yes," he admitted. "In the end, I thought about it and decided that I want to be with you. And if that's what you want, it's for the baby's sake. If that's what I want." Adriana laughed. "Are you doing me a favor?" "But why a favor?" "Because that's what you're all about." "Robert, I really don't have time to talk to you. Bye for now." After talking to her ex, Adriana's throat was suddenly dry. She drained her water and had no time to catch her breath when the phone rang again. "I told you I don't have time," roared Adriana and disconnected. The young woman fidgeted with the phone and looked at the screen and saw that Betty Mill had called. "Sorry, I just didn't look at the display," Adriana repented. "Yeah, I realized that," grinned her friend. "Though at first I thought you'd confessed. You're in a different circle now." "I guess so," she grinned wryly. "That's what Betty guessed. I see the party didn't go well. It might have been for some people, but it wasn't for me." Adriana sighed. "Did something happen?" "Not exactly, but don't say anything else." Betty cut her off. "I'm coming to see you this afternoon. We'll treat you." The friendly ambulance arrived at exactly 300 hours. Betty showed up with a rather impressive cake and 2 bottles of wine. "Wow!" Adriana exclaimed as she accepted the gifts. "Are we really going to sit down to all this? I can't vouch for the cake, but we'll have plenty of wine." He winked at his friend. "So tell me." Actually, Stephen, unlike most of his peers, could drink and never got drunk. He was down to the norm, and that's it. But on his 16th birthday, the kid had a blast. It all started with a glass of Spanish wine and ended with whiskey. Or was it tequila? Whatever. The birthday boy had mixed everything that could be mixed, and now he was paying the price. With a massive headache and a dry mouth. Oh, he crawled off the bed. Standing up from the floor, the boy felt like he was about to fall. Stephen sat down in a chair and, passing the no-nonsense dizziness, walked to the kitchen. "What head hurts?" with sympathy asked his father, sipping strong coffee. "There is such a thing," nodded Stephen. "Drink kefir, it'll help. And then some aspirin," John suggested. "I will. And then I think I'll argue some more." "That's right," approvingly said Wallace Sr., watching his son pouring kefir. "What I wanted to ask, why did our tutor leave so quickly?" "I have no idea," Stephen grumbled. "We were dancing with her. Then she and my mom went to the conservatory for something. And that was it." "That's about it," Dad muttered. "Well, I see. What's the matter?" Stephen asked, perplexed. "No, it's nothing. I was just asking. She told me she didn't feel well. But maybe she did." Wallace Jr. shrugged and bypassed the kefir in one fell swoop. "I'll go underground some more." After taking an aspirin tablet, Stephen went to bed. But the sleep was gone. And really, why did she leave? The guy wondered. "I didn't do anything to hurt her, unless her mom said something to her." Stephen sighed. His relationship with his father was more trusting than with his mother. And it wasn't just that 2 men would understand each other better than a woman or women would understand them. The boy guessed that by and large Kathy had given birth to him for propriety, that is to say, to make it like everyone else's husband, wife, and kinder. It wasn't a very pleasant realization, but that's just the way it was. His mother took almost no part in Stephen's upbringing, which, however, did not bother him at all. His father was much better at it. So what the hell is Mom doing with Adriana? And what the hell did Mom say to her? But she couldn't suddenly feel sick 10 minutes after dancing so hard. Or maybe they were too incendiary. That thought cheered Stephen up. She's not a bad dancer, the guy thought. And remembering how he had spun the spit and pressed Adriana against him, he suddenly felt no, this is too much. However, the racy thoughts that Stephen hid even from himself were so persistent that the guy gave in. The fantasy went off the scale, and it took a lot of effort to subdue it. We have a purely business relationship, he whispered like a mantra. She tutors me. I tutor her. She tutors me. I tutor her, and nothing more. We have a purely business relationship. The frank visions finally receded, and Stephen fell asleep. But what was so terrible? Betty wondered. Personally, I don't see anything wrong with dancing, but for some people it's something out of the ordinary. And you just ran away. I was so embarrassed, I could have fallen to the ground. Well, you shouldn't have. By the way, by running away, you gave that lady reason to think you were thinking something like that. But think about it. Adriana wanted to say something, but she just froze with her mouth open. Betty's right. But on the other hand, it was too much for her to be in there. And she had a class with Stephen on Monday. What are we supposed to do now? You don't. A friend chuckled. It was only then that Adriana realized she'd said the question out loud. After all, you haven't done anything criminal. And if this Kathy thinks otherwise, that's her problem. By the way, everyone judges according to their own depravity. Well, there's something to that. Hee. Adriana. By the end of the first bottle, it didn't seem so terrible. Adriana really hadn't done anything she should be blushing about. So she had every right to walk into her employer's house with her head held high. As the afternoon turned to evening, Betty suggested karaoke. Let's go out. You didn't have a good time last night, so why not continue the party? The karaoke bar was not far from the neighbor's yard, so her friend's idea was well received. Betty and Adriana sang a lot of songs and then went home in a great mood. And on Sunday morning, the Wallace Hare's tutor forgot about any residue on her soul. And on Monday, no matter how hard Adriana tried to put an independent expression on her face, she could hardly manage it. When the young woman entered the Wallace house, she was confronted by the rich man's wife. Kathy could clearly sense the mood of her son's tutor. A look of satisfaction flashed across the woman's face. "Hello, Kathy." Adriana greeted the lady of the house, and her voice trembled. "Hello," Kathy replied arrogantly, and tapping the high heels of her suede boots, walked out of the mansion, leaving behind Gorky and a trail of French perfume. Stephen behaved as if nothing had happened, but Adriana sensed, faintly, a change in his demeanor. The young woman did not understand what it was, but had no doubt that it had taken place. Besides, it seemed to Adriana that the apprentice wanted to tell her something. She could even guess what it was, and it made her uncomfortable. "Adriana, can I ask you a question?" "Yes, of course. Why did you leave my birthday party?" Adriana suddenly became agitated. What was that about? She thought. But pulling herself together, she answered, "Stephen, it's nothing. I just didn't feel well." "You sure?" Wallace Jr. asked incredulously. "It's just that you and I were dancing like that. And I thought, what, did somebody hurt you or something?" "That's quite an audience." Stephen smiled awkwardly, and Adriana thought for the umpteenth time that her student was not the happiest person in the world. And those who say that money isn't what makes you happy are right. Though being rich is certainly more comfortable than being poor. It depends. "No, it's all right. Trying to appear wealthy," replied the tutor. "No one has offended me. Everything is fine." Already on the bus, Adriana thought that she had not lied to her tutor. She really wasn't offended, because if she were Alina, she would probably have done the same thing. Stephen, meanwhile, was thinking about his tutor. When Adriana came to class, she was wearing a strict black pantsuit. Yes, except that she saw silver dresses, which opened expressively in the windows, that is, the back and the exact leg. And what a graceful waist. Stephen remembered how he had felt through the thin fabric of the dress, the warmth of her skin, and he was thrown into a fever. No, something must be done about it. Panic, the boy thought. Stephen tried to remember the shortcomings of his tutor, and to his dismay, found none. Except that height didn't work out. But is it such a disadvantage when otherwise the figure is super? No, stated Stephen. And it seems, it's not just attraction, it's love. What's new? Asked Kathy, the brown hairdresser. The woman's name was actually Christina, but the hairdresser for all the city's elite preferred to be called Tina. That's okay, Ms. Wallace shrugged. Recently celebrated the 16th birthday of Christina's son. That's all the news. Christina came to see me the other day, Tina said meaningfully, and Kathy realized what the hairdresser was expecting from her. Oh, that Christina. Always in her repertoire. Kathy loved her best friend very much, but she couldn't help but notice one flaw in her. Christina couldn't keep her mouth shut, and she liked to exaggerate. So, Kathy decided not to live up to the expectations of a nosy hairdresser. At least not to begin with. But she didn't like to make a big deal out of it, especially since there was nothing to make a big deal out of. But she told me a wild story, laughed Wallace. Oh, mercy, what a wild story. She said that your son's tutor showed up at his birthday party half naked, and they danced an obscene dance, Tina said in such a tragic voice, and made such terrible eyes that Kathy laughed even harder. But they did dance, said Wallace, miffed. But I didn't see anything indecent, just a regular dance medley. And the dress was within the bounds of propriety. Perhaps such a dance for a teacher and a schoolboy is too familiar, but it was far from indecent. But I still gave the tutor a preventive talk. Good for you, exclaimed the hairdresser of the United States. It's better to overdo it than underdo it. Kathy, Christina go on friends for a long time. No. And it occurred to her that her friends complement each other. One not overly talkative, the other curious to the point of obscenity. Exactly, Kathy said, making it clear that she had no desire to talk about the subject. Tell me, how is France faring? Kathy asked. The day before yesterday, Tina flew in from Paris, where there was an international conference, which was attended by the whole top of the beauty industry. Elena was much more interested in it. What's she going to do? Hummed Tina, disappointed that they wouldn't hear anything interesting. Worth, what's up with the sales? There's a fur coat sale that week, and you're silent as a partisan. Mrs. Wallace exclaimed. Where? Kathy drove her trusty BMW and thought that it would be good to talk to her husband, to fly to Paris for a week. Blago they had a small, but very beautiful and cozy mansion with an attic. Sail abroad is not a gathering of wild-eyed Russian women in local boutiques, which, in fact, to call them such could only with a great stretch. Paris or Milan is another matter. It's settled, Kathy thought with a satisfied smile. I'll ask Wallace to go to Paris. If he doesn't want to, I'll fly alone. I'll give myself a fur coat for New Year's Eve. At the same time, and buy an evening dress. Before New Year's Eve, they have a great selection of dresses, tapes. Yes, I would love to, regretfully divorced husband. But that week I have an urgent business trip, so you'll have to fly without me. Well, I'll fly without you, Kathy replied with feigned sadness. To tell the truth, the Wallace couple had rarely traveled together in the last few years, but they were both playing nice. John guessed that his wife was not bored of spending time without him. Kathy, in turn, knew that her husband was not without sin. Both were satisfied with everything, so there were no jealousy scenes. The main thing is not to forget to brighten the sad face about the fact that the other half cannot join. It just so happened that the Wallace couple departed on the same day. Look, behave yourself, they told Stephen. He jokingly saluted them to dress. Keep warm and don't try to eat dry. Kathy threatened with a dainty finger, and the parents left the house. The school was quarantined, and Stephen, having seen his parents off, fell into a warm bed. Adriana should be home by 2 o'clock to finish her nap, so he can sleep until noon. Adriana. The other day, Stephen's buddy David and Tutor stopped by. Just as the new girl was leaving, the guy winked. Stephen was overcome with a strange feeling. Funny, but at that moment he felt that the beautiful Tutor was really his girlfriend. He also wished she wasn't. No, Wallace Jr. was forced to answer. That's my math tutor. Wow. The prize whistled Buddy. And my tutor. She's a 45-year-old woman weighing a pound and swiping everything without looking. Stephen laughed. For what purpose? Wallace, have you lost your mind? David grinned. Don't you get it? It's a sin not to hook up with such a girl. Wait, so you could hook up with a tutor? Why not? Isn't a tutor a woman? A woman, of course, Stephen mumbled, but she's smarter than that. However, Adriana in her silver dress reappeared in front of his eyes. Wallace Jr.'s fingers felt the warmth of her skin, as if it were his, making him throw a fever again. Now in a semi-drama, Stephen let his dreams expand beyond his wildest dreams. But this time the boy didn't think to quell them. Stephen, what are you thinking? Adriana asked, and the millionaire hair finally woke up. This is the 5th time I've asked you a question and you can't hear me. Sorry, I was thinking, Stephen said, embarrassed. If Adriana knew what he was thinking about. It's okay, it happens, the tutor replied condescendingly. Aha, said the student absent-mindedly. And suddenly, without fully realizing what he was doing, he kissed her. Stephen, what are you doing? The young woman marveled, pulling out of his embrace. I'm Adriana, he whispered. I love you. Adriana looked at her watch and sighed heavily. 3rd hour of the night, and she still hadn't poked her eyes open. The young woman replayed what had happened in her head for the umpteenth time and wondered to herself, how did I do this? Adriana knew one thing: she was an educator, Stephen a mentee. That was the way it should have been done. But you don't fight when you fight when you fight. Adriana didn't condemn teachers and tutors who got close to their students, but she didn't approve of their behavior. And now she was one of them. We're like Romeo and Juliet, Stephen whispered, to which Adriana only grinned. I'm not Juliet. I'm getting old. Don't say so. You are the youngest, the most beautiful. Remembering this dialogue, she felt Juliet blushing. Catherine, aye. Then, and what to do now? She thought in despair. One thing is clear: Adriana will no longer work with the Wallace hair. We can, of course, pretend that nothing happened. But how will Stephen behave? What about Stephen? Adriana hummed to herself. He's a smart guy. I'm sure he understands the situation correctly. It was just a passing weakness, and that's all. The young woman calmed down, but then suddenly began to sort things out. Something was bothering her, but what was it? And when Adriana realized it, she became completely despondent. After all, Stephen had told her about love. But was it love? He knew better, of course. But the teacher suspected that it was a typical teenage hormonal outburst, and now she'd committed an ethical breach. Tomorrow, she would tell Stephen to stop cooperating. With that thought, Adriana fell asleep. The young woman walked to school as if in a dream. She had only slept for 2 o'clock, so she did some work. Adriana, are you not feeling well? The vice principal asked sympathetically. I'm not well. I'm disgusted. I'm the worst. And all because I was no better than a teacher who has relationships with underage students. I wanted to yell back, but Adriana limited herself to a short answer: no, it's okay. The young woman didn't remember how she'd gotten home. She still had to go to Stephen's class. Although, in fact, what's to stop her from calling and saying she won't be coming again? I didn't hire you, Stephen pointed out. So what do we do? Adriana asked with a sigh. Wait for my father to arrive. And he would be here in a week. A week, Adriana repeated disappointedly. Yes, in a week, Stephen confirmed. For a second, The young woman had the thought of telling her mentee that she wasn't feeling well. Yes, as a matter of fact, she was. Adriana had not slept well. She had a headache, and the drive to the cottage village 15 kilometers from the city was an ordeal. However, despite the mess in her head, Adriana realized in time how she would look in her student's eyes, like an ostrich hiding its head in the sand. "I see," the young woman muttered. "Well, I'll be in at 3 then." "Okay." Stephen acted as if nothing had happened, for which Adriana was very grateful. Toward the end of the class, however, the boy said, "Does that blouse look good on you?" "Thank you," Adriana nodded. "It emphasizes the beauty of your figure," he added with a meaningful look. "Yeah." The tutor nodded again. "Yes, I think I'll go. But what if I don't let go? What if I shout? No one will hear." Stephen grinned, putting his arm around her waist. "Stephen, relax. You already with dignity," answered the guy, and added no, so no. Stephen understood perfectly well that Adriana was uncomfortable. Of course, he had heard many stories about teachers and students, but he realized that his tutor was not one of those. Well, is Stephen willing to wait as long as it takes? The boy realized more and more clearly, no, this is not an affair. Stephen no longer hinted to the tutor about what was between them, but he does not intend to give up his feelings. In a month. "Are you not satisfied with the salary?" Wallace Sr. asked in surprise. "Or did someone offer you more?" "That's not a problem. I can pay you more. Just name the amount." "No," Adriana shook her head. "It's just a family emergency." "Well, I'm sorry," John said with genuine regret. "It's been a pleasure working with you." "Likewise," Adriana said, feeling like an asshole. Stephen's parents had returned safely from their trips, and Adriana had not told her employer that she planned to stop working with him, because Stephen was behaving as if nothing had happened, and she saw no reason to do so. The classes continued. The incident was slowly being hammered out, but a couple days before the conversation with Wallace Sr., Adriana began to feel ill right in class. "You look pale," Betty remarked. The friends were drinking coffee in the teacher's lounge, and Adriana glanced at her watch every 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. "Yeah, I don't feel well," she nodded. "Nauseous. Dizzy. Must be getting sick. They say there's a virus going around right now," Betty nodded. "So I'm sorry, friend, but I'm gonna stay away from you." "What's there to apologize for?" Adriana said in a weak voice. "How many more classes do you have?" 3 more. Mila shook her head. "Well, why don't you wake up? You're not wearing your face. Go to the clinic and get a sick leave." "Yeah, I guess I'll do that." After listening to Adriana, the therapist said, "You're not the one to see." "Who is?" "I have something serious, but whether it's serious or not is for you to judge," the doctor smirked. "And I, for my part, refer you to a gynecologist. To tell the truth, the question was asked out of inertia." Adriana understood everything, but refused to believe it. The gynecologist's voice sounded like the rolls of thunder. "Congratulations. You're pregnant. About 5 weeks. Is she kidding?" Adriana thought angrily. Though how would she know that a tutor could be pregnant by her student? "That's a load of crap. Are you sure?" Idly she asked. The gynecologist smiled confidently. "So run along and enjoy it." "Thank you. You are a man," smiled Adriana. That same day, she informed John that she could no longer practice with his son. When Adriana got home, everything was falling out of her hands. The coffee had run off. The reaper had flooded, and when she poured water into the bathroom, she nearly flooded the neighbors. "Damn it," the young woman shouted in her heart. The cell phone rang. When she saw Robert's number on the display, which Adriana had never bothered to delete and blacklist, she giggled hysterically. Lately, her ex had suddenly started attacking her with calls. A couple of times in the driveway and one near the school. Adriana needed him like a fish needs an umbrella. But right now, Robert's call came in handy. That's who she's going to get off on. "Hello, beautiful. The ex-lover said hello cheerfully. "Hi, Cole. No kidding," replied Adriana. "And what the hell do we need?" "Why the hell?" Robert was clearly in a complacent state, and this particularly aggravated the young woman. "Who else? She's on a roll. What do you want from me? I told you when I said it was over between us. Why did you do that?" Then Adriana cut her off. "That's it, Robert. Love is long gone. The tomatoes are wilted. Our shoes are too tight, and we're not going back." Xiao. On the quarrel, Robert had no choice but to pass out, and Adriana collapsed on the bed and sobbed bitterly at Riva. She felt much better and needed someone to talk to. Mom, despite their trusting relationship, wasn't the right person for that. That left Betty. "Honey, I'm not distracting you," she asked. "Did something happen to you?" "Yes," Adriana said quietly, with a sigh. "Wallace again." "Well, you could say that." "Did you go to the clinic?" "I did. A young woman took my sobs away, and they told me you'd been diagnosed with something serious." Scared Betty. "Betty, I'm pregnant," Adriana replied. And I let the tears flow again. "Pregnant with Robert." "What Robert with Stephen?" "Oh my God. How the hell did you get pregnant?" "I don't know." Overwhelmed, Adriana said, smearing tears down her cheeks simply. "But it just happened." "Yeah, Adriana, you're a real handful." Betty sounded shocked, which is not surprising. "What did you teach me, girl? What to do? You think? I don't know. I wanted a baby so badly. And now you're having one." My friend exclaimed. "What's the problem? Does it matter who the father is? For yourself. Go ahead and live your life in peace. And what will the school say?" "Adriana, fear God. You're already 32. Who cares what anyone says? No one really cares." Golikova's mom's Fang, who teaches KHL, comes in a Jeep. And she's married, by the way. Money is not enough for her. And you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. "Yeah," she sighed. "Adriana, you know how you said Robert was on the horizon again." "Well, I did. So what? But I just thought maybe I shouldn't push him away." "Well, the man's cute, no matter what." "What's your point?" "Because he could be the father of your baby." "Did you think long and hard about it?" Adriana asked. "He didn't want his own child. And you're suggesting we force someone else's on him?" "You don't say. You say that he's being persistent and that he seems to agree to the child." "Maybe, maybe not," she cut him off. "How could you even think that?" "Well, maybe you're right. But maybe Robert really has changed. It's a long story, but it's hard to believe. But it's up to you," Milo chuckled. "But I wouldn't throw it around if I were you. It's not like Wallace Jr. is going to raise your kinder. That's the last thing on my mind," Adriana assured him. "In fact, I walked out on them, and I explained it somehow. I said I wanted to terminate my employment for family reasons, and I didn't cover my soul." Betty summed it up. "Exactly. Okay, Betty, I'm gonna go take a bath. I already tried that today, but I failed miserably. I almost flooded the neighbors, but now that I talked to you, I feel better." "Well, what are best friends for?" With a smile asked faithful friend. "Go take your bath. And don't worry. You know I'll always help you." "I know," said Adriana gratefully. Lying in the warm, fragrant bath, she thought how nice it was to have a friend like Betty. Someone who would be willing to help her, if not help her, at least listen to her at any time of the day or night. Always acted on Adriana like a breath of fresh air or a balm on the soul. And this is something not everyone can boast of. Maternity leave became for Adriana that fertile period when you can do nothing and enjoy life. The future mother took a lot of walks, loved classical music, ballet, and began to visit exhibitions. And now Adriana, having enjoyed the works of a young, and according to rumors, fashionable artist, decided to take a walk in the park and eat ice cream. "To you," as always, asked the ice cream seller with a smile. During her pregnancy, Adriana could no longer imagine her existence without this treat. From time to time, the woman bought new products, but her greatest love was still vanilla ice cream on a stick. It was delicious. Adriana could eat it every day. "Yes, I'll have a scone," she smiled. In response, Adriana took the ice cream and sat down on a bench nearby. As she downed the ice cream, she blissfully froze her eyes and stroked her belly. Adriana. Wow. She thought she'd forgotten that voice. Adriana slowly opened her eyes and saw Stephen. He hadn't changed a bit in the 6 months they hadn't seen each other, except for his hair. "Hello," he said with a smile. "Hello, Stephen," she replied discreetly. "How are you?" asked the guy, looking carefully at Adriana's stomach. "Fine, thank you. And you?" "I'm fine too." He nodded. "Applied for the department. Hospitality business. Good for you," praised the former tutor and smiled strangely. So the lessons were not wasted. "So," Wallace Jr. nodded with a smile, keeping his eyes on her belly. "He's figured it out." Adriana thought desperately. "Adriana, did you get married?" Stephen asked hesitantly. "Yes." After a little silence, she answered. "Well, good luck," said the guy, his face changing. It was good to see a mutually successful entry. Stephen was sure that this child was his. Of course, theoretically Adriana could have gotten pregnant by another man, but he was sure that was not the case. And it wasn't just her saying she was single. As if an unmarried person couldn't get pregnant. Wallace Jr. could make a great psychologist if he wanted to, if the tutor had another man. There'd hardly be anything between them. The woman in the relationship would have molded Stephen with a ringing slap, or at the very least read a rant. After all, Adriana could have said that she had a loved one to whom she was faithful, and Stephen would not have insisted. He was a man of low tide in general. And male solidarity was not an empty word to Wallace Jr., so everything was leading up to the fact that he, Stephen, would soon be a father. The party at the invitation-only private nightclub was in full swing. She just took off without saying anything, to the savvy hair 1 million Wallace, to David's friend under his 4th glass of stiff cocktail. "Yeah, I understand," he assured her. "Well, what did you expect? It's a delicate situation. What if your parents had gotten to it?" Well, David certainly had a point. But first, real feelings. What was Stephen sure of? It is such a situation is perceived painfully, and all reasonable arguments are useless. And then, continued his buddy, his exhortations, your relationship has no future. Yes, and your former teacher made it clear that she does not need them. She realizes, probably, that not our circle. David wanted to say something else, but Stephen didn't give him the chance. He grabbed his friend by the chest and threateningly said, "What did you say? Come on, say it again." "Stephen, don't be stupid." David tried to get free, but it was not to be. Wallace Jr. clutched his club jacket even tighter and said, "I'm gonna give you a good one. She's 100 times better than those silicone chickens." "Stephen." "Yeah, I'm not arguing." But it's like the guy didn't hear him. "Come on, let's go outside and talk. I don't care if you're a man or not." "Oh, don't do that. Vassal is good," he intervened in their quarrel. David didn't say anything like that. "I'll see you now." Stephen got up from the table, but he couldn't keep his feet. The hair to the 1 million fell right onto the table, knocking over all the dishes. "That asshole ruined the party," someone said. "What happened?" asked the receptionist Kelly, whom the guys knew well. "Get out of here, you chicken." Stephen's got a temper. "You weren't even close to her, young man. We pay for the battles, the dishes," strictly said the girl, not paying attention to the insults. She knew this young man perfectly well and did not understand what fly bit him. Usually the son of the owner of a chain of hotels and pleasure boat parks behaved correctly and left generous tips. He must have had an accident, the receptionist thought. However, that didn't mean that broken glasses and plates, not to mention workplace insults, were the norm. No, if you smoke, you'd better answer for it. No way, shouted Stephen in the face of the administrator. For extra convincing Nasanov Figo right under the girl's nose. Kelly, I'm sorry, David said quietly. The frame is just a problem. So I drank more than usual. The girl quit. I'll pay for it now. Thank you, smiled gratefully at Kelly. Shall I call him a cab? Yes, be my guest. The receptionist stepped away from the table, and the guys began to calm the rambunctious Romeo. Wallace. Sit down, Mishka said, trying to get his buddy onto the leather couch. Stephen obeyed, while the waitress cleaned up the mess. He mumbled something to himself, glancing at the girl. The cab pulled up, the receptionist announced, and the guys picked Stephen up and led him to the exit. I'm not going anywhere. Wallace Jr. protested as the boys led him to the car. Stephen, come on. David persuaded him. The stake has wandered, and it will. She kept it from me that she was pregnant. Stephen persisted. Adriana hid my child from me. The friends noticed with annoyance that a crowd of gawkers had gathered near them, which was to be expected. Some were already filming the scene. My tutor is pregnant by me and tried to hide it, Wallace proclaimed to the cab driver. Come on, get in, the driver grinned. Is the meter running? I don't give a damn. Stephen said carelessly, getting into the car. Do you even know who I am? I'm Wallace, and I can buy all of you outright. Yeah, nodded the cab driver and thought, sure, you can in about 10 years. Right now, your rich daddy's paying for all your fun. But he didn't say anything out loud. After all, the customer, as you know, is always right. Stephen dozed off on the road, and when they got to the Wallace mansion and the driver was pushing him, he started looking around in bewilderment. How did I get here? Stephen asked the cabbie. How? The cab driver grinned. How else did your friends call a cab? You can pay by card, unless it's a money order. All right with a transfer. Wallace Jr. nodded, noting that it was starting to get light outside. He patted his pockets. His cell phone was in the pocket of his jean jacket. Speak. Put your cell phone number in your teeth, Stephen said. The cab driver dictated the number, and the guy, swearing to himself, hit the wrong digits. He managed to move the money only on the third attempt. After that, Stephen got out of the mansion's overturned cork and flew to his room. John Wallace was furious. He rarely surfed social media, but this time it was as if he could sense the posts and videos of inappropriate behavior. Their only offspring was murdered by hotel and boat owners. The commentators were on fire. These majors are completely crazy. They think they can do anything. A young girl was indignant. Their parents have no time to educate them, replied an older woman. That's the result. Both comments gained more than 300 likes. I wonder if what he said about tutoring is true, wrote another commenter. By the way, there were some who condemned Adriana, but strangely enough, they turned out to be not so many. Mostly everyone was cursing Stephen and his parents. What can be said? The masses did not pity the rich. What does he think he's doing? Growled the head of the family. I would ask another question, Kathy grinned. What does she allow herself? I mean allowed. By the way, her leaving immediately seems suspicious to me, but the former tutor has yet to be dealt with, replied the husband. But our son behaved simply unacceptable. And what came over him? Well, you heard everything yourself. Kathy shrugged with a grin. I wonder if she's really pregnant with our son. And if so, how did it become known? Ramke? Who knows? John said thoughtfully. He must have found out by accident. Maybe he saw her somewhere on the street, and there is already a pose on the nose. It's been a while since she left. And if it was the tutor who gave up the lessons in order to date Stephen with impunity, suggested Kathy. Anything could be, nodded the husband. Besides, I'm not ruling out another possibility. The child may not be from the race, but he may or may not be from the race. The loud facts of the relationship between them are in evidence, the spouse noted, which means the tutor needs to be punished. And how do you not tell her? John grinned. Are you familiar with the law? Or do you have on your mind only clothes and loud salons? It's 16. And that means that our former tutor doesn't fall under Article 134. Who cares? Kathy exclaimed. She's clearly got our boy's head up her ass. And the bottom line is what we have. Wallace looked at his wife and shook his head. And the boys. She's worried about ruining her reputation. That's all. This is no time for recriminations, though. Not hot, said John. In any case, this situation needs to be dealt with. Anyway, I know everything and will take appropriate measures. What do you say? Adriana also saw these posts and was shocked, to say the least. In addition, the young woman was afraid that it would become known at school. I don't know what kind of Adriana he was talking about. Betty shrugged. Your name wasn't mentioned. Betty, think about it. How many tutors named Adriana have tutored your son in math? Yes, and all those socialites at Stephen's birthday party will know who he was talking about. Son of a bitch, swearing at Betty. Who told him to say that? And come on, Adriana waved her hand. He's just a teenager. What's he got to do with it? Whereas I'm a grown woman. Don't beat yourself up, her friend said, taking her hand in hers. You're having a baby, and that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. And everything else will work out somehow. The friends sat in the park on Adriana's favorite bench closer to the ice cream stand. The saleswoman, looking at them, thought that female friendship, no matter what they say, still exists. She nodded encouragingly to the young women, and sweetly intercepting her gaze, winked and asked Adriana, well, on plumber, Cheku, on plumber, Cheku. Resolutely answered the mother-to-be. To find the former tutor's son, Wallace Sr. did not have much difficulty. True, he did not catch Adriana at home, but even that was not a big problem. She's probably in the park, said the thin old woman in the colorful sundress with a smile. She goes there every day. And that's right, she's expecting a baby. It's good for her. Oh, and who are you? I'm from work. The businessman smiled charmingly. So she's walking in the park, son. While John was thinking whether to go to the park or to wait for Adriana on the bench, a young woman approached the house in the company of a spectacular blonde in a tank top and shorts. I guess my assumption of a chance encounter was correct. Wallace grinned to himself, looking at the impressive belly, a former tutor to his only heir. Bye, dear, said the blonde. After that, the ladies lost their meters. Take care. Good night, replied Adriana, and taking a wide-keyed sundress out of her pocket, headed for the entrance. Adriana, a young woman could hear you. The voice of her former employer, and her heart pounded as if she were competing in a running race. So he saw the empty rollers too. Adriana guessed, and trying to appear calm, answered, hello, John. Yes, of course, I'm listening to you. I think you understand why I came to see you, he said. She saw no point in pretending, so she nodded. Yes, I do. But I assure you, don't do that, Wallace interrupted, raising his right hand. You don't have to assure me of anything. Just answer me one question. Did anything happen between you and my son? I realize, of course, that the child you are expecting may not be Stephen's. However, his behavior indicates that the situation did not arise out of nothing. So what's your answer? Adriana was silent. She was more ashamed than ever in her life. I don't advise you to cheat, John added with a sigh, because my son and I have no secrets from each other. Even if Stephen does not decide to confess soon, sooner or later he will. The young woman was ready to confess everything, but she couldn't say a word out of excitement. Adriana, yes, John, she said in one breath. But it was only once. Well, should the child say it or not? Feverishly thought, and Adriana. Oh, how great was the temptation to keep silent. But as she did not like reticence, she decided to confess it to her. After all, Adriana had not demanded any money from them, nor did she intend to. As for Stephen, it would pass. The guy will forget her, fall in love with some girl, or parents will find a bride from their party, and everything will go back to normal. And the baby? Adriana nodded. But you don't have to worry about that. I'm not claiming anything. I guess, nodded the businessman with a thoughtful expression. But that's not the point. The guy seems to have lost his mind. What do we do? I don't know. But I know you have to leave, Adriana, said Wallace Sr. as if it were a little thing like a drink of water. And where am I supposed to go? Stunned, said the young woman. Where do you want to go? Spread his hands, John. Even in the capital. I quite seriously want to offer you a very favorable deal. He took a breath and continued, I buy you an apartment in any city you want. And after the baby is born, I'll help you with employment. What is required of me? Adriana asked, remembering that this was a transaction. It's nothing. The businessman smiled. My son knows nothing about you. Actually, it sounded like fun. After those posts and videos online, she didn't want to stay in this town. Adriana was already thinking about renting out her apartment and moving to her parents' house in the country. And here was such a great opportunity to start a new life. Just her and the baby. And yet Adriana had her doubts. What if Stephen wants to find me? She asked a reasonable question. But if you don't tell him where you are, he won't find you, will he? John grinned, and so, as they say, out of sight, out of mind. He saw that the proposal is kind of interested in tutoring, but she still has doubts. So it is necessary to find such arguments so that they do not remain. And he seems to have found one. Adriana, note that I didn't report it to the agency, Wallace said. I don't really need to. Besides, I could have used all my connections to make sure you weren't even hired to scrub floors at a school in the neighborhood. Then again, there's the possibility that this story would become known throughout the city and you'd start to be recognized by sight. Still, I need to think about it, Adriana muttered. Sure, nodded the businessman. Here's my card in case you deleted my number. Don't you dare delay me any longer. But so thought the young woman as she walked up to the apartment. As recently as yesterday, I was thinking of leaving myself. And today, when I'm offered an apartment anywhere in Russia, I hesitate. Anyone would, Betty remarked, when Adriana called her to tell her about Mr. Wallace's offer. There's only free cheese in a mousetrap. Well, not really free, but it's too easy a condition. He'd do anything for his son. Right now, he's just trying to get the kid to forget you. And an apartment seems like a reasonable price to pay. But what's an apartment to a man who has mansions all over the world? And then, deep down, he's willing to help his grandson. You think so? Yes, I'm sure of it. The confidence of the force was not in vain. At this time, John Wallace was driving home and thinking that in case of Adriana's consent, he would kill two birds with one stone. He would help his son to forget the woman whose love for him would lead to nothing good, and at the same time, he would help to improve the living conditions of his future grandson. I'll miss you, Betty sobbed, seeing her friend off on the train. Oh, I can't, laughed Adriana, even though she wanted to cry too. It feels like I'm not leaving for a neighboring town, but for another country. Though I'll miss our heart-to-heart conversations on the phone too. It's not that tears did appear in her eyes, and in a second her friends were already sobbing, hugging each other. Coming through, coming through. The conductor hurried up. What do you have? The friends said with glee and, waving their hands, laughed through their tears. After the incident in the club, Stephen decided not to take alcohol in his mouth under any circumstances. Watching the video, the guy saw himself from the outside, and it was a disgusting sight. In addition, he elementary set up Adriana. Certainly Mom's girlfriend's ball also will not miss their own. So he should explain himself to his former tutor and apologize to her. Stephen did not know where she lived and realized that his father was unlikely to give him the address. There was a serious conversation between father and son, and John made it clear that he would not approve of a relationship with the tutor, so something had to be done. Stephen went to the website of the tutoring agency where Adriana worked, hoping to find a lead. He almost howled in disappointment when Adriana's profile was deleted. Damn it, he said out loud. Had his father done this? Stephen didn't want to believe it, but how else to explain the absence of her profile? And then it hit him. He knew his ex-tutor worked at School 26. So what am I waiting for? Thought Wallace Jr. and laughed with relief. School 26 was almost in the center of town, and getting there from the cottage community was no problem. But would Stephen be given the address? Especially since it was summer, and it was not certain that he would find anyone there. But there were no other options, so we'll make do with what we've got. "Hello," greeted the janitor politely. "Hello," with dignity replied an elderly woman with a high purple hairstyle. An elderly woman with a high purple-colored hairstyle answered with dignity. "Can you please tell me if I can find a female employee of this school?" The janitor frowned, and Stephen began to fantasize on the fly. "You see, an acquaintance wrote me an address, and I lost it. Besides, I recently changed my cell phone, and all the numbers are still in the old one. I don't know." The old woman shook her head, looking at him intently. "In general, no one gives the addresses of employees. Circumstances vary, of course, but mostly they don't give them. But maybe I'll get lucky." Stephen smiled. "Everything can be." The janitor shrugged her shoulders, and seeing a woman in a bright yellow dress, Lisa turned to her. "It's for you, and another employee. And social media for what?" hummed the woman. "So the profile is closed," spread his hands Wallace Jr. "And who do you want?" Lisa asked. "I need Adriana. She first went on maternity leave, and then quit. I think it was due to a move to another city. I don't remember exactly." "In connection with the move to another city," shocked, said Stephen. "Exactly. You didn't know?" "No," I shook my head. "We just lost sight of each other for a long time. What am I really explaining?" Stephen thought, and apologizing, left the school building. The boy walked and thought that this was clearly his father's doing, and something told him it was. The father was determined, and who knows what the father would do if Stephen found Adriana. Certainly not good, and especially not for her. So wouldn't it be easier to just leave it alone? It's been 10 years. 2 years ago, Wallace Sr. left this world. Alas, cancer spares no one. Stephen inherited all the assets as planned. He took over the firm, and his father's business partners noted that the boy was quite good at it. 3 months ago, Mrs. Wallace remarried and went to Paris with her new husband. She was very fond of the Parisian mansion with the attic and its sale. Stephen had all the money, power, connections, and opportunities that a mere mortal could only dream of. The only thing missing was love. Women for pleasure didn't count. By the time he was 26, Wallace Jr. had no family. "What are my years?" he joked, though his mood was often cloudy. But when he remembered his lush brown curls and short figure, he was immediately enlightened. "Adriana, Adriana, Adriana," he thought with a sigh. And why couldn't I defend my love? Why? Why? Because I was only 16. What could I do? Yes, I could have found her later. His thoughts were confused, as they always were when Stephen thought of Adriana. He was aimlessly clicking buttons on the remote control. And suddenly, at first Wallace thought he was hallucinating. Well, what could he think? With Adriana smiling at him from the screen. In person, Stephen turned up the volume. The queen of his dreams was talking about some new method of teaching retarded children. And when the host of the program said in which city the children's institution was located, Stephen was ready to kiss him. It's decided. As he fell asleep, he thought, tomorrow I will visit that city. Stephen, but we've been preparing for this deal for almost 6 months, exclaimed his deputy. Are you sure that everything will work out without you? Daima, he urged. My late father always said that a real businessman should literally radiate confidence, even if you do not feel it. Yuzik, I trust you, so let's give it our best shot. I know you can do it, instructed the deputy. Stephen left the office and got into his Lexus and drove off to meet his destiny. Finding a children's center for children with disabilities was not difficult. Half the job is done, he thought contentedly. Before going to the neighboring town, Stephen made some inquiries about Adriana. He found out that his tutor was single and raising her son Christopher alone. Christopher, Wallace repeated quietly, no longer doubting for a second that Adriana was raising his son. Christopher Wallace. There was a bouquet of scarlet roses in the car. At first, Stephen thought about buying a ring, but changed his mind. Flowers were enough, but a ring might scare Adriana away. The young businessman was sitting in his SUV in the parking lot in front of the children's center and leisurely held out his coffee. Suddenly, he saw her. Adriana was dressed in a light flowing gown of soft coral color, spectacularly appreciating her brown hair slightly burned out in the July sun. The demeanor of the century buns. The young woman approached the white Toyota and opened her purse, which apparently contained the car keys. Crazy, Stephen thought. She hadn't changed at all. He picked up the flowers and walked toward Adriana. "Good afternoon," Stephen said with a warm smile. "Good afternoon." Stunned, Adriana repeated. "Stephen, how did you end up here?" "Adriana, let's not talk about you," Wallace said affectionately, yet firmly, holding out the roses to her. "It's inappropriate in our situation. If you haven't already realized, we're supposed to be together." "Well, I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. I realize I should have done it much sooner, but better late than never, isn't it? Stephen, I also want to be involved in our son's life. And don't tell me that's not my son." Tears came to Adriana's eyes. She only now realized that all these years she had been suppressing her love for Stephen. First, because he was an underage boy and she was an educator. And then because John had made it clear to Adriana that he did not accept her as Stephen's daughter-in-law. Adriana realized how much she enjoyed saying that name. Yes, but how would Wallace Sr. feel about it? "What's a sister-in-law?" he asked with such tenderness that Adriana's heart sank. "What about John? My father died 2 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. Life goes on," Stephen answered quietly. "And I want to live it with you. By the way, Antashka is home now." Adriana smiled. "Great. So, let's go meet our son. I'm all for it." When Stephen first came to meet his son, he felt his soul filled with something warm, light, and very, very pure. It was love. "Daddy, where have you been so long?" asked the boy. I just got lost on the way to happiness," answered Stephen with a smile, and his eyes sparkled. Adriana, watching them, did not think to be ashamed of her tears, because they were tears of happiness. Stephen and Adriana got married 3 months later. In the wedding dress, the bride resembled a young girl. And no wonder, because true love has no age, and a person is young as long as he loves and is loved.